In Module 4, we're going to talk about systems development, and in previous modules we've talked about various systems. We've talked about systems for different functions in the organization. We've also talked about systems that performed different functions, like capturing transactions, for example. And in our previous module, Module 2, I believe, we talked about ERP, and we talked there about these standalone systems and how these systems evolved, and then ultimately the idea of integrating all of these systems. So we've talked, and even in the first module we talked about how do we use information systems for strategic advantage, or to accomplish, or to enable us to reach our goals and so forth. In this module, we're going to talk just a little bit about the process of developing these systems. Where do they come from? Rather than just kind of saying, here are the systems and they just magically appear in the organization. There's quite a process involved with these systems, from literally from the birth or the ideation all the way to the end. So that's what we're going to talk about in this module. Now, systems analysis and design is actually a real general term. A lot of people will talk about systems development, which is a little broader term that refers to both the analysis and the design of the systems. And in some areas of study, you'll study the analysis separate to the design, and then in some classes you'll just have development, which will do the analysis and the design. So development's kind of a broader, more umbrella type term. But basically, systems analysis and design is just the term that we use to talk about the process that we go through, typically in teams, in order to either develop or to modify or to purchase software, whatever we need to do to acquire the functionality that we need. And this process, it's real important to understand that this process always begins with a business need. We talked about websites in the previous module, and we said we don't just develop a website because we have the web and because other people have a website, so I guess I need one too. While all of that may be true, but the reason we develop a website in our organization is because we have a specific organizational need. We are attempting to achieve some particular goal, and the web is going to be a vehicle, and we develop a website for whatever, to advance these goals. And it's important to understand that when we started developing these systems, back in the 50s, of course we didn't have all of this designed and defined structured approach to developing systems. We just, of course, began developing, and there were a lot of failures, and a lot of these failures were process related, not because we couldn't make this system do, or we couldn't take the technology and make it do what we needed it to do, or we couldn't make this system talk to this system. No, it was just simply because of the process of developing the systems. We either missed the mark when we developed a system maybe that was a perfectly good system. It just kind of didn't do what we needed it to do. Because we didn't do a good job determining the requirements right up front, for example. And we could go on, or we underestimated, the needs. We underestimated the resources. And, there are just all kinds of reasons. So obviously, since the 1950s, we've come a long way with respect to systems analysis and design, and therefore the whole practice of systems development. And it's much more scientific than it used to be. It was originally more like an art. You just kind of did it. But we have a lot of tools, a lot of methods, a lot of methodologies. And no job shop is going to be the same. So I can talk to you tonight about how we go through this process, and you may be saying, well, at work we do it a little differently. Well, I'm sure you do. I'm going to talk to you in a rather generic fashion about the steps in the process. And I'm going to introduce you or discuss just a few tools out there that are widely used. But again, every job shop, every site has its way of doing things. And so, some of these tools will be tools that some people use religiously. Some of these will be tools that other people modify in different ways. So this is not an exact science, if you will. This is not, this is how you will develop a system. So don't expect it to look exactly like this. But I want you to understand conceptually what the process is all about. And sometimes it's when we keep emphasizing that this starts with a business problem, that's real important, because it's sometimes easy to get sidetracked when you are a developer, when you are a technical person, and you don't know a great deal about the business, number one, and you just know about the technology. Then you're just wanting to use the newest and the latest and the greatest, and you're wanting to build these really interesting and exciting systems that may or may not be what the business really needs. So we want to make sure that we are starting with a business process. Now, you have a slide, that says systems analysis and design is very large in scope, and it includes the following topics. And the first one on that list is IT project stakeholders. We have to talk about stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Well, ultimately, anybody that will be impacted in any way by the system is a stakeholder. Maybe you're going to be actually using the system, interacting with it regularly. Maybe you're going to use it very seldom. Or maybe you're not going to interact with the system, but you are going to use the data that comes out of the reporting that is, a part of the system. So indirectly, you are going to be interfacing with the system. So anybody that is going to be a stakeholder in any way, whether you're going to help develop the system, you're on this project team, whether you're going to be using the system's being developed for you and your colleagues to use, or as I say, maybe you're just going to use some of the output from the system. But anybody that's going to be a stakeholder needs to be a part of the process, because we've got to make certain that this tool, this system, does what it needs to do. I mean, that's pretty simple. But it sounds pretty simple, at least. But what exactly does it need to do? Well, everybody may need it to be a little different kind of an animal. And so it's real important that we don't leave anybody out of this process. And even if you're not an IT person, even if you say, well, I'm not an IS major, I'm not going to be developing these systems, well, you're going to be a stakeholder, because you're going to be using an information system at work, or using the outputs of an information system at work, and you're going to be a part of a project, or you're going to be come to work someday and find out that somebody's changed your computer screen, or the interface is different to what it used to be, or what do you mean you're getting me a new payroll system? What's wrong with the one I already know how to use? So you will, most assuredly, in one fashion or another, you will ultimately become a stakeholder. We're going to talk about, we're going to emphasize, it's going to be a foundational idea, the importance of the stakeholders. We're going to talk a little bit about the selection and the management of these projects, and then we're going to talk about the systems development life cycle that has some very distinct phases. And this is a very common, a very traditional methodology that is used. And it's simply a set of steps that we go through, and we will go through these steps differently with different projects and different industries, different organizations. So again, this is not going to be This is not going to be something that's terribly exact. This is going to be something very conceptual, but it's going to be, somewhat generic, if you will. If we look at our slides, you're going to see a slide that talks about the selection and the management of IT projects. Where do these ideas even come from? Well, necessity is the mother of invention. I say that a lot, but it's so true. At some point, someone is saying, I need certain data to make these decisions, or I need to have this information in order to develop this report or to complete this task that I've been asked to complete. So, there's this need. At some point in time, there's going to be a need recognized. Now, I like to tell you that one way to think of it is that these projects are either going to be in response to a problem, an opportunity, or a directive. So a problem means something's broken, something's not right. It may mean that you have a system in place and it's not working right, or it needs to be upgraded, or some new functionality needs to be added to it, or a new part or a component. Or it may be that the problem may be that you're not able to make the decisions that you need to make. You're not able to respond to customers in an appropriate amount of time. So a problem, something is not right. Or maybe it's an opportunity. An opportunity for us to develop a better inventory system that would perhaps give us a little bit of a competitive advantage. Or a directive. Now, a directive I just like to mention because oftentimes we don't spend a lot of time thinking about a directive, but a directive is a directive. It says you will do this. So a directive obviously comes from somebody that is in a position of authority. So maybe it's the federal government that says you will report these things. Maybe if you're a candidate for a political office, the federal government tells you you must report these various things about the monies you've raised and who they've come from and how it's spent and so forth and so on. Maybe you're you're in somewhere in the industry, in the medical field, and you're impacted by HIPAA, the Health Information's Portability and Privacy Act, that's going to say, you will keep records according to these standards and so forth. Or maybe it's Sarbanes-Oxley that says you will keep certain information for 5 years and so forth and so on. Maybe it's coming simply from a boss, that says, I want this done. End of story. It's going to happen. So obviously, if something is a directive, first off, realize it's coming from somebody that has the authority to say, do it. But if it is a directive, then we're going to go through the process a little bit differently, because a true directive, we don't have the option of saying, we don't have the money to do that. Don't have the money to do that. Well, you know what? Tough. A lot of people didn't have the money for the Y2K problem back when the century rolled over in the year 2000, some 16 years ago. But you know what? Everybody had to address the Y2K problem before the calendar rolled. It had to be done. End of story. So we do approach these a little differently, and I just like to mention to you that directives are an option. One of the things out there. But with respect to the difference between the problems and the opportunities, let's think about where these come from, these requests. Well, some of them, let's just look at the whole organization. Are they going to come from higher up in the organization? Are they going to come from lower in the organization? Well, let's think of that for a minute. It's not uncommon for people who are right here working on the front line, if you will, to say, look, we need a system that will do this. I'm unable to communicate with my students in thus and such, or I need a some way to accomplish this task, or we're just not getting this done in enough time. I can see customers are not happy because we're not responding appropriately. And so I'm down here on the front line, I'm seeing a lot of things, and I may be one of the first to recognize that there is a problem that's not being met, or that there is something not working appropriately with a particular system. So oftentimes things will come from the bottom up. They'll come from the users. Now, but they're going to look a little different. The ones that come from a user are usually very much about me. I'm the user, and I can't do this with my data. I have trouble with my system in this way. I'm not able to do what I need to do. This is hampering the way I work. And so it's because that's all I see about the organization. It's not because I'm being selfish. No, it's because I am an accountant and I see the accounting. I don't see what's in operations. I don't see what's in, what the marketing people are doing. I don't see maybe what's going on. I just see my little world. So they're going to be much more narrow in focus. They're going to be things that would be important to accountants because I'm an accountant and this is what I see. On the other hand, if it comes from further up in the organization, these are going to be coming from people that are see a more global view. The CIO, the CEO, any of the vice presidents, or these steering committees, these cross-functional teams that are cross-functional committees that are maybe doing our IS planning, that are planning strategically for our IS resources across the organization. They're seeing a much broader view of the organization. So these people are going to see things that are much more kind of organization-wide, if you will. They're not going to be quite so myopic and so narrow viewed. So there will be some differences, but your slide tells you that it may come from upper management, it may come from employee innovations, it may come from the help desk, it may come from the customers themselves. And but at some point we need to make some changes, perhaps in a business process, or maybe we see an opportunity that the technology has advanced now that will allow us to do something that we previously could not do, or maybe we see that there is better software available that will help us meet our need, or maybe we just see the organizational mission, the goals, the objectives have changed, or just the competitive circumstances have changed, and thus so all kinds of reasons why things need to change. And we have a lot of changes going on that are just routine. I forever getting communication from the IT people about patches, Windows patches being delivered, for example. But as the system's going to be down for this short amount of time because we're upgrading the server software, whatever. So a lot of it is routine. But the long and short of it is, it all has to come from somewhere. It all has to start somewhere. And at the end, it is a cycle, and we talk about the systems development life cycle. And ultimately we're going to end up with the system completely developed, and we've handed it over, and now it's in operation. It's now, it's our inventory system. Somebody's using it. But before long, it's going to come out of operation and be back into development as it is being. Sometimes it's very brief because we're just making minor upgrades. But then at some point it becomes almost totally, out of touch, and we're back into development again with that system as it needs to be upgraded or maybe even totally replaced. So it is indeed a cycle. Now, we're kind of talking about, okay, where do they come from? Well, all over the organization, across all functions, different people are going to make requests. Now, let me give you an example that may sound a little foolish, but you've probably figured out by now, I learn by analogy. I like to teach by analogy. But I remember a time a few years ago when I was still sitting down writing checks to make my monthly payments before online banking, and I hated that task. And it was just so routine, and you had the KU bill, and you had the cable bill, and you had the water bill, and you had the gas company, and you had the telephone, and then ultimately cell phone. It just was, and I would just seem to waste so much time dragging out the bills and opening the envelopes, and and writing the checks and stuffing them and stamping them, and I just hated the process. And it seemed that every month when I would sit down, I would have this stack of donations where the Heart Association had called, and I had agreed to send them $25, and so they had sent me the little form to do that. And then the next day somebody called from the Girl Scouts, and then it was somebody wanting to send special needs children to the circus, and then it was the Sheriff's Ranch, and then it was the MS Society, and then it was the diabetes people, and it went on and on and on. And you know what? All of these were legitimate, valid. Well, of course I want to help your organization. Of course I want to help people that have cancer. Of course I want to help people that have heart disease. My father has my father had cancer. My grandmother had. Of course I want to do all of these things. They're all very good causes. But what I found is that every month I would write, and I am like, this is ludicrous. This is ludicrous how much money I'm sending out. $5, $10, $20, $30 at a time. I mean, this is crazy town. I've got to stop this. And we give a lot of money, or a reasonable amount of money, through the church. I guess a lot is a relative term, but we do give a reasonable amount of money through the church, and of course then through the church we're always being brought into contact with people who have needs of one kind or another, and we're often involved in meeting those needs. And I said, whoa, this has got to stop. So I finally sat down and said, look, I'm going to have to make some choices. And, I'm going to have some criteria. I'm going to have to choose to give to some of these and not give to some of these. They're all worthwhile. They're all problems that need to be solved. I simply don't have the money to solve them all. So how am I going to choose? How am I going to say, well, we're going to keep the heart fund on the list, but not cancer? What's going to be my criteria? So I had to come up with some method or some way of saying, and so I just ended up saying, well, you know what, I'm going to choose X number, and I'm going to choose the ones that have that are the most immediately touching my family. And if everybody would do that, then we would maybe get the needs met. But I had to come up with some type, because I just couldn't keep on addressing every need just because it was a legitimate need. Now I want you to then kind of transfer that thinking across to your organization. All of these different people have sent up requests, and these requests are most of them are legitimate. Yes, these are really our needs. Yes, I can understand why you might like to have this functionality. I get it. But at the end of the day, we don't have the money to fund it all. So we have to have some way of determining and of prioritizing and choosing. We have to have some process for the selection of projects. And at the end of the day, we look at this kind of the portfolio, if you will, which is the sum total of all of our projects. And what we like to see is some balance. Some projects are extremely large and extremely, some are way more risky than others. And, you know, you don't want to have all of your projects. You don't want to have, you know, several big risky projects going at once. You need to have some type of a balance. And so this portfolio that your slide talks about, you know, we come up with a kind of a picture of the portfolio, what we want our portfolio to look like. For example, my investment portfolio when I was younger, I had more risk involved, but as we are approaching retirement age, we're getting a little less risky, and we've got more of our money in you know, in more conservative instruments rather than you know, being quite as gambling quite as much, if you will, to use that term. You know, in the stock market, we know that the more risk involved, the more return. If you know, if you win. So, but again, we have a portfolio approach, and that's how we know where to invest and how much to invest where, because we know what we want the big picture, if you will, to look like. So every organization is going to have their big picture, and you're going to have to understand that you're always going to have these infrastructure projects where maybe we're dealing with the network, we're dealing with the underlying, you know, the underlying utility, you know, and things of that sort, and you've also got maintenance and things that will be ongoing, and so you will have a budget for development and or adjustments and things like this, and you will have some type of a process that you will go through, and you will have a selection criteria that you will use that will help you determine which of these projects get funded and which of these do not. Now, we keep referring to the Systems Development Life Cycle, the SDLC, and this is as I say, it is kind of a traditional, somewhat generic framework that involves some standard phases, or if you will, and there are a lot of tools that are used in these various phases, and we're going to talk about some of them. But I want you to focus on the slide that gives you a list of your well, no, I'm sorry, I'm not there yet. Pardon me. This slide here that talks about, it gives you the list of some of the tools that we use, and we, you know, start off with a system request and some project plans, and we do a feasibility analysis, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about data flow diagrams, about entity relation diagrams, and other documents that will be a part of the process. But we're going to start with a systems request. You're in the planning phase, and here's the bottom line. When we look at the systems development life cycle, you are going to have, I'm going to tell you there are X number of phases, and I'm going to talk to you about the planning, the analysis, the design, the implementation, and the maintenance phase. So I'm going to give you 5 phases. Now, if you go look it up in 10 different systems textbooks, they may not all have, somebody will have 6 phases, somebody will have 4 phases, and you know, but you're going to see that they're all saying pretty much the same thing. Some people just combine some of the phases and just, you know, speak of them in a little more aggregate. Others are a little more finely detailed, but we're all pretty much going to be saying the same thing. The first thing we do is the planning phase, and this is where we actually plan the project. And I want you to understand that the selection of the systems is happening before the planning begins. The organization has this process, and it'll have a selection committee, and it'll have these criterion, and these systems requests will come in, and then they will be evaluated according to these criteria, and some of these will get the nod, the go-ahead, and some of these will not. And the ones that get the go-ahead, this means yes, we're going to move forward with the system. Now, what it doesn't mean is yes, we're going to develop this system. We very, very, very possibly will, but you need to understand that at this point it has met the criteria, but we haven't studied the system yet. We haven't gone into great detail, so we can't say absolutely this is going to work, or absolutely this is going to be a worthwhile project. All we can say is that based on the projections and the initial ideas of what it's going to cost and what it's going to do for the organization, initially it looks like this one has made the cut. And so we are committing the resources to go the next step, which is to enter the planning phase. And we'll go through the planning phase, and if we still, at the end of the planning phase, find this particular system to be still feasible, still worthwhile, then we'll move into the analysis phase. And at the end of the analysis phase, if we find, but you know what, even though we may have already been involved with this for a few months and spent several $1,000s, if at any time it becomes obvious that we have now learned something, or maybe something has changed, but it's no longer feasible, then we're going to stop. And it's going to be sunk cost, and we're going to jump off this ship. We're going to stop. So we like to refer to that as a creeping commitment, that our commitment to this project it's creeping, and as we study more and analyze more, we're going to obviously find out more. So as that takes place, then we may find that it's no longer feasible. And the systems request is actually, you have a slide that talks about the systems request, which is the vehicle for getting this project started. And every shop will have their own way of doing this. But at the very least, you're going to be saying, Jennifer Williams is requesting this, and a classification, is this a new development or is this a modification? And you're going to be letting them know the business problems that will be solved, and basically what you're requesting. Now, there is a slide that has an example of such a request, and I want you to look at it carefully. This one comes out of a systems textbook, and it is a systems service request from the Pine Valley Furniture Company. And what you will see here is that Jackie Judson, who's in marketing, and she is located at headquarters, and here's her contact information, which would be important. And so Jackie Judson is requesting a new system as opposed to an enhancement or an error correction. And in terms of urgency, she is saying that, it's fine to go on with business as usual until we go through this process. But notice that sometimes we're going to be saying immediate, operations are being impaired, or, we're bleeding money. So some things are more urgent. But this is kind of a routine request, and we're starting it through the process. Now, there are two major portions here, the problem statement and the service request. And these are not the same. similar, but not the same. The problem statement is simply that. It is the statement of the problem. Now, on this particular slide, we see that Jackie Judson says, there's been a lot of growth, and so the volume of work has increased and the complexity of the data that we need to deal with, and we're currently using manual methods and a complex PC-based spreadsheet to track and forecast customer buying. And this is causing problems. Number one, we're slow to catch buying trends. Number two, the process of manual data entry is really prone to error. Number three, the volume of data and the complexity of the analysis seem to be overwhelming our current system. So, very specifically, but rather broadly, Jackie Judson is saying, look, this is what's going on. This is where the problem lies. This is what's wrong. And so then in the next section, okay, Jackie, you've told us what's wrong, but what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to thoroughly analyze. She says here, I request a thorough analysis of the current method of tracking and analyzing customer purchasing with an intent to design or build a completely new system. So basically, she's not saying, could you add this component or could you make this change? She's saying, will you analyze this situation very carefully and, consider a new system? And then she goes on to say, this is what the system needs to do. It needs to handle customer purchasing activity. It needs to support display and reporting of critical sales information. And it needs to assist the marketing personnel in understanding the complexity of the competitive business environment. And then she goes on to make a statement about what it will do for the organization. Now, I'm being very specific about this because this is going to be part of your homework. I'm going to give you a little scenario, and you're going to write me a systems request. Now, you can find other sample systems requests, or you can simply use this document as a template, and you can assume that you can say the organization where I work, this is exactly what they wanted. You're always going to have similar information, but again, different job shops are going to have some differences and a lot of similarities. So then this document then makes it into the mix. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that there is a huge backlog of requests. Obviously, all of the requests do not get made. And a lot of times we hope then that it'll come out of the next budget. It didn't make it this time. What a lot of things do is, maybe the top 5 made it out and the others have moved up. So you're like, whoa, if we have this much budget next year, mine ought to make it. But then what happens is we have things that occur that make yours maybe be more or less important in the next cycle. Or you have something urgent that comes ahead. So some things just keep getting pushed down. And some things work their way to the top. So there is always a backlog. So I want you to understand that it's not as simple as I make this request and it happens. Not at all. Basically the problem statement is used to justify and to this is why I need this. But the service request portion of it tells exactly what I expect. And we're not being terribly detailed, but we are being specific about the functionalities. I need a new system that will do A, B, and C. You don't, of course, get into the details of how and so forth, but you do, very clearly spell this out to them, what you need. And so what happens in this planning phase then is once the project is determined to be one that we're going to move forward with this project, then this project gets handed to a team. And so let's say you are on the team and this project's been handed to you and it's made it past this initial cut, and so apparently we're going to be developing or moving forward with this system. So you will have a project manager, and there will be a lot of planning going on with respect to the you've got to consider your resources. How many people are we going to need? You've got to get your team assembled. You've got to think about how the team's going to work, how often they're going to meet, how they're going to communicate. All of these kinds of things. You're going to a schedule of how start breaking down and getting you a schedule showing how long you expect the project to take. And then you're also going to be doing feasibility analyses. You're going to be looking to see whether or not it makes sense to proceed with the project. Now, isn't that kind of what we just did? Well, we did, but we did so based on what Jackie Judson. This is all we know. And so we can look at this and say, well, this is important. How would this line up with our strategic goals? Which one of the goals would this maybe address? I mean, obviously, you're typically, looking for the needs that will more directly address your goals and your objectives and so forth. So you have this information, but you don't have a great deal of information. That project team, though, once they get handed this, now they begin to get very serious about the feasibility. So they began looking to see whether or not it is indeed feasible to continue with this project. And when we think of feasibility, we're typically thinking about money, economics. Well, economics are important. And when we think about economics, we can talk about tangible and intangible. When we think about the benefits, we may be able to say, well, we can now do this with 3 fewer employees, and so look at what an employee package, we pay them each this and their insurance and so forth, so we would save $78,000 a year for each employee that we don't need times 3. So you can really do the math and say it's going to save us this much money if we do this. We can say, the faucet's dripping and it's dripping a gallon of water an hour, and this is what a gallon of water costs, and therefore this is what it's going to save us, or this is what it's going to make. We think it's going to bring us X new customers, it's going to increase our market by 5% or whatever. And so, things we can actually count. But then there will be intangible benefits that are things like goodwill, loyalty, customer satisfaction. It's easy to say customers are going to like this better, but is that worth $250,000 or is it worth $250,000? I don't know. We have to try to quantify those things. But again, we will have some things that are tangible, some things that are intangible. We'll also have some things that are variable and some things that are more fixed. For example, some costs or benefits like the costs will be relative to how much we use. Some benefits and costs are one time, some are recurring. You might have one time you buy the server, but every year you pay the licensing fee, for example. So you're going to have one time, you're going to have recurring, you're going to have tangibles, you're going to have intangibles. And so we could just talk a lot, and if you take a systems analysis and design course, we would go into a great deal of detail here. But the bottom line at this first analysis, at this first glance here, you are trying to the best of your ability, given what you're You're trying to determine what you think the costs of this of a system would be and what you think the benefits will be, and you're comparing those. Obviously, if it's going to cost way more than it's going to benefit, then right away you're going to say this is probably not feasible from an economic standpoint. I'm reminded of several years ago when my husband and I were considering remodeling, and we didn't know if we wanted to build or if we wanted to remodel or if we just wanted to buy something different. We just were torn. And so at one point we asked a contractor to come here to the house, and we said, ballpark, if we wanted to add a 2-car garage and we wanted to redo the kitchen and we wanted to move this wall to there and we wanted to do this and thus and such, ballpark, I mean, are we talking 20,000, 50,000, 150,000? What kind of money are we talking here? Because we wanted to have a ballpark idea whether we wanted to put that kind of money. And so basically, he said, ballpark, it'll be about this. Now, he didn't count nails and 2x4s, and there was nothing that said, all right, now you're going to do it for that, no. He was just saying, well, typically a garage would cost you this, a change in the roof line would be this much, I say the kitchen is going to be about this much. Obviously, it's going to depend on how expensive. But if you buy an average grade cabinet, or and you buy and he could kind of tell us within reason. So we were just trying to kind of get an idea about the economic feasibility of it. And so after talking to him, we said, you know what, it's probably it's probably something then that we may want to consider. It appears like it would be economically feasible to move forward. But economic feasibility is not the only issue. It's not all about just can you afford it. Now, we can talk about political schedule. We can talk about a lot of feasibilities. But you always are going to talk about your economic. You're going to talk about your technical, which is... do we have the technical expertise to develop this? Do we have the hardware, the software, the technology that we need? Do we have the people that can maintain it and that can, so technically, is this going to be feasible? And we had some technical questions to ask our contractor. There were questions about where the heating and air was and where it would have to be relocated and how we would do such things and how we would reroute the plumbing, and is this going to be a major problem? And again, yeah, it could all be done, but was it going to be, within reason? Because you might say, well, isn't that really still about economics? If we don't have enough people or we don't have the infrastructure, isn't it about whether or not we have the money to do it? Well, yeah, but again, we have to look and see if we've got or we're going to be able to meet those technical needs. And then cultural, which is also referred to as organizational. At the end of the day, when we do this, is it going to work? And for example, at the end of the day, if we spend all this money on our house, is this going to be the house we want? Are we going to be happy with it? Or are we going to feel like, gosh, it's still not exactly what we wanted because we had to work around the others? I mean, is it going to work? Is the traffic flow going to suit our family? Is it going to be big in the places that our family needs it to be big, and so forth and so on? And so is this really going to work for your organization? We've already talked about how not every strategy works with every structure. Every organization is different, and so we have to make sure that our organization will withstand and be able to operate inside all of these changes, but ultimately, will this do what it needs to do, and will it work? So the project team is going to be looking very carefully at those feasibilities, and then, and we do have to then, as I said, I'm just not going to say as much about it, but we have to be concerned about legal and contractual. You may have a contract or some legal thing that says you have to buy your stuff here, or you have to have this certain arrangement, or you're not allowed to, whatever. There are a lot of things out there that you might want to be concerned about, and then you will run into also as a part of your project. You'll run into copyright issues. You'll run into other, you have to be mindful that if we use this system, these are the licensing, and we'll have to abide by these various situations. Can we do that? And of course, political is really a lot about how the key stakeholders in the organization are going to react to the situation, and how you're going to make that work. And a lot of people clump that under operational analyses. And then of course, schedule your timeline and your people. Have you got enough time? Has this got to be done in 3 months? Or, if this is going to take 6 months, is that okay? Is that feasible? Is that going to work? And maybe, if you had extra people, you could do it sooner. But, given your resources and your timeline. So basically, you're going to be doing this feasibility analysis. Now, you're probably already wondering, but I still don't know a great deal. I'm sitting here saying, just like my contractor, he didn't know what kind of light fixtures I was going to want. He didn't know what color I was going to paint the wall, and he didn't know exactly where I was going to set the toilet in the new bathroom, or where I wanted the sink. And there were a lot of things that obviously could still throw a jag in this later. And we were not being specific, but within reason, he's saying, just given what I know about the technology and about building houses and what I see right now about yours, I'm thinking this, Now, once you get into it, there's always something, especially on a remodel job, you always, oh gosh, this won't work, or that's not square, or this is not the way there's always stuff going on. And it's the same thing in a project. So obviously, at this point, when you're saying, we think this is going to cost this much money, and we think it's going to benefit us this much, hey, you may be in a big organization, or on a big project, I should say, you may be as much as 800% off, because you've not analyzed the system yet. You've not drawn up the blueprints. You've not picked out the floor plan. You've just done this, given what I know now. But before you start drawing all of that, it makes sense to see, okay, let's look real carefully at this, and let's begin to look and see. And if you've got problems in any of these areas, technical, operational, economic, whatever, then you've got to slow down and see if it's still feasible. And you may right away, you may come back and make a recommendation to the powers that be, to management, to the steering committee, and say, here are the reasons why we don't recommend continuing with this. And then ultimately, it's a management decision. IT doesn't decide what projects get chosen and or what projects continue. It's a management issue. Now, you have a slide here that talks about a baseline project plan. And basically, what a baseline project plan does is it's this big picture view that your project team is coming up with right up front. And if you will notice, you've got a slide that says a baseline project plan outlines a proposed solution and maybe alternatives, and gives some high-level details for how the project is going to proceed. There will be inaccuracies because early estimates, we obviously, the more we learn, the more specific we can be. And the slide that follows that is this slide that gives you an example of the baseline project plan. And I'm paying special attention to this because this is going to be part of your assignment as well. But notice, again, you can do it exactly off of this. This tells you what each item should involve, and then you can just use this as a template. But I want to first start at number 2. I want you to look at this slide that has the baseline project plan, And I want you to look at number 2, system let's look at 3 first, the feasibilities. Notice here that they're listing that in this section you would discuss these feasibilities. You would discuss the economic analysis. In other words, you would do a cost-benefit analysis, you would do some justification, maybe a spreadsheet, whatever it takes, but you would, again, this is high level, but you would be saying this is basically what it's going to cost, what this system's going to cost. These are the one-time costs, development costs, but you're also going to bear in mind if you've got ongoing costs that are going to happen in the life of the system. So this is what the system's going to cost, and this is what the this is what the benefits are going to be. You can Google and see example of cost-benefit analyses and economic feasibility analyses. You can find those things all day long. Not looking for a great detail here because you don't know. It would be about, like my contractor did that said, well, I can come out here and do this garage, this, and I can, do it for probably about this much. And so then, of course, it's up to you to determine if there's enough value to warrant, But again, in this situation, the project team is going to list both the cost and the benefits. And so you're going to, in this baseline project plan that's ultimately going to be presented to management, this is your project team taking that initial first look. And here's what we find. This is what we find in terms of economic justification. This is what we find in terms of technical. What are the relevant technical risk factors and the overall risk rating of the project? Your technical, you're looking at things like, do we have expertise with this technology? Have we ever developed a system like this before? Yes, but maybe not this large. Or, the size, the cost, the scope, our experience level with the technology, the experience level of this project team. All of these things are what really determine the risk level. And so that's what we're talking about here in the technical feasibility. How risky is this project? So you're going to want to list the things that you see as risk factors, or you're going to want to talk about why you do not see this as a risky project. It's a rather safe project. My home thing was pretty risky because it was a lot of money we were putting in, and even though you think you know how it's going to turn out, but you're still remodeling. And so at the end of the day, there's the risk that we won't be able to get where we're going, and that we will have spent all this money and the house will not be what we wanted it to be. Operational analyses. Here you're going to discuss some of the you're going to talk about the system and how it's going to work, and how it's going to address the needs and things of that sort. And you can read and go on down. I've actually gone over these already, but you're going to create for me a baseline project plan for a scenario that I give you. And so you're going to talk about, you're going to push yourself to come up with, an economic feasibility. Kind of like my house example, you're going to have to make some assumptions, but I'm going to tell you, and you're going to have to say, well, what is this probably going to cost, or about what would this cost, and what kind of value would we realize? And so you're going to have to talk about that in each of these sections. And then also in your schedule, come up with some type of a timeline, that says we can do this in 3 months or 6 months or whatever. Again, I know you're not experts at this, number one, and number two, it's early in the game, so you're not going to have a lot of detail at this point. I just want you to get a feel for what the process is like, and so that's why I'm going to ask you to do a systems request document and then turn around and do a baseline project document. Notice the fourth section here is about management issues. This is where you're going to talk about the team members and their roles and who's the project manager and who reports to who, and these are the analyses that you're going to be the analysts and you're going to be the the software developers or whatever. And how are you going to communicate both inside your team but also with the owners, or the managers or whomever you're developing the system for. And you're going to talk a little bit about the standards and procedures and how deliverables will be evaluated and things of that sort. Now, I've said I held off on the introduction because actually the introduction is the first part, but it will have to be written last, because basically you're going to be going into this analysis, and you're going to look at each of these feasibilities, and then ultimately that introduction is the overview, where you give an executive summary. And an executive summary is where manager can just read this few paragraphs or a page or something, and they're going to see the scope, the feasibility, in other words, what you're going to do is you're going to summarize all of this and say, bottom line, here's our recommendation. We recommend that you develop a web-based system to do this, da-da-da-da-da-da. And so managers don't have time to go into great detail. And what they're going to do is they're going to read your initial recommendation. Okay, and then they're going to drill down and read more where they need or want to read. The second part here that talks about alternatives. Basically, the alternatives are always very difficult for students, because most of you, if I were looking at my housing example, my alternatives would be to remodel, to build a house, or to buy somewhere else. And so in this executive summary, I could say, given our feasibility assessment, we have determined that it would be best to remodel, because it would allow us to keep our location, which is something we would like to do. And because we feel like it's going to be yada yada yada. In other words, that executive summary right up front that says we considered building, we considered buying, but we have decided our recommendation is to remodel, because and so this is the first part, but it'll be the last thing you write. You can't write the executive summary until you've developed the other pieces. And again, I know you're not experts. I just want you to push yourself a little bit, and I want you to, because if I give you a scenario, then you'll have to think about, well, what kinds of things would we be talking about or thinking about in the economic analysis? What would we think about in the operational analysis? So I just want you to push yourself in those areas a little bit. Now, once we get past this planning phase and we come up with this baseline, the baseline project plan is the output of the planning phase, and we make that recommendation to the people who are making the decisions. And so those people, the people that are making the decisions, whether the steering committee, the committee that chooses. So this is the output of that planning phase, and so then we're recommending that the project continue, and so we move on as the project's going to continue, and then we move into the analysis phase. And in the analysis phase, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to gather our requirements, and we're going to structure them. So bottom line, we're going to be talking to all of the users, stakeholders, business. We're going to be learning everything we can about the business and the processes, because we're trying to determine what this system needs to do, what it needs to do. Now, we can do interviews, which of course are very informative, but they're very, very expensive. I mean, people have to take time out of their jobs, and especially managers and upper level people. It's just a lot of time, and plus you have to be able to have a meeting, with those people. Maybe travel, maybe do it by Skype, or maybe you're in the same location. But interview will give you very, very rich information, but it costs more. Questionnaires, if it's a large organization, you can get answers from a lot of people all at the same time, if you will, or in a short amount of time through questionnaires. But the process of developing the questionnaires is pretty taxing a process, and but it works. But you're not going to get as rich of information, and you're not going to get the opportunity to go back and drill down, if you will. You get what you get, and that's it. You don't get to say, well, because you said yes, let me ask you this. You don't get that opportunity like you do with the interviewing. So there are, of course, pros and cons. We also look at document analyses. We look at reports. We look at order forms. If this is a system that's going to be producing orders, we're going to look at order forms, and we're going to look at order forms that are blank and order forms that have been used, and we're going to tell by the ones that have been used if people are not using them properly, or if there's something inherent, a flaw that we see that's causing people to do workarounds or something. We're going to be looking at all kinds of things like that. We can look at policies. We can look at procedures. There's all kinds of documents and reports and forms and so forth that we can look at. And then also we can do observation, which again is very, very rich, because you get to see the people are not telling you what they do. You're actually seeing them do what they do. But we also know then that when people are being watched, that sometimes that can create some issues and make them behave in a manner that's not exactly like they always behave. And also we know that it's a snapshot. We may be observing them on a Thursday afternoon, but this may not be typical, or maybe Fridays are not the same as Thursdays, and so it's just a snapshot thing. So all of these methods of gathering information are very useful, and they all have their pros and their cons. Now, this is a very lengthy process, because we're just going to say gathering information and move right along. You may think it's not. It's a very lengthy process. It's going to take time, and you've got to talk to people at all levels, it depends on the scope of the system, but if it's organization-wide, you got to talk all over the organization. So, you've got to talk to all of the stakeholders. User involvement is critical. This system is not yours just because you're building it. It's not for you. And so you may think it's the greatest, but I'm the user. Another one of my little analogies, I've raised 3 daughters, and they're all very different, and I've bought a lot of prom dresses, for example, over the years. And I can go out and buy a dress that is arguably, anybody would tell you it's very well made. It's by maybe a very popular designer. It's this year's popular color. It's well made. It's a good price. It's a lot of people would love the dress, but I can bring it home and all 3 of my girls can look at it and say, wouldn't wear it to a dog fight. So if that's the case, then I've completely failed. Not because there's a technical failure. There's nothing wrong with the dress, and maybe I think it's the greatest dress I've seen this week, or this month, or this season, or ever. But you know what? The user doesn't like it. And so why would the user not like it? Well, because if they do not like the system, now you've got people that are going to try to thwart and just be ugly people. But by and large, if this helps me do my job better, I'm going to like it. If this makes me look good at work, I'm probably going to like it. And so ultimately, user satisfaction is very, 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 very important. Now, once we understand we have gathered all the data, we've asked all these questions. What do you do every day? What's the first thing you do? And then what do you do? And what do you use this report for? And what kinds of things do you need to see? And what kind of, we just on and on and on and on. And we get all of this information through questionnaires, through interviews, through observation, through document analyses. We've got all of this data now. I've got to make sense out of it. And I've got to, in some way, interpret this data and use this data to move toward a solution. How do I take this pile of data and turn it into a set of, this is what the system needs to do? Big jump. So we not only have to gather the information, we have to structure it. And so there are a lot of different tools out there, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on any of those. In a systems analysis and design class, you would get the opportunity to use many of these tools. Data flow diagrams, for example. These are diagrams that help us understand how data is flowing through the organization. Each of the elements, you have some little, little shapes and little rectangles and arrows, and they all have a specific meaning. And so what we do is we kind of model the data as it's moving through the system, and it goes through this process and it comes out. It's like a dirty boy went into the bathtub and a clean boy comes out, and because we see what happened during that process. So we see data, customer data, whatever data flowing into a process that gets transformed in some way, and then data leaving that process, and sometimes that's going to another process, and sometimes it's going to be stored, and it's data going to be waiting till it's called upon by a particular process. But it shows the data as it moves through the organization, through the processes. It's called a process diagram, and it shows data moving through all of the various processes in the organization. We also will draw like entity relation diagrams. These are database development kind of tools. We're going to be looking at the data, and we're going to try to see what data is related to other data. So we have this, we keep information or data about customers. We keep data about orders. And so we keep data about our products. And so is there a relationship? Let me see. Customers place orders. Orders contain products. So you see, we do have relationships, because when we build these databases, we have to be able to get there from here. We have to build these relationships in. If you have developed or done any work with Access, a relational database system, if you had perhaps CIS 261 or 151, you would have dealt with these tables and how we have to build relationships. And so entity relationships diagrams are another one of these documents that we do. Use cases, which is another type of diagram that basically that just shows activities occurring and who are the actors, who's actually doing this activity and so forth. So again, why do we do this? Because it helps me to take all of this data now and make sense of it. But it also helps me work with you, the user. I can now sit down and say, okay, here, look at this data flow diagram. It's my understanding this data is coming into this process, and this takes place, and this happens. So it gives the user a way to, we can represent or model this, and then we can communicate with the user, and they can help us understand if we're on the right track. So again, we're going to capture, gather all of this requirements information, all of this data about what the system requires. Then we're going to structure it. We're going to make sense out of it. We're going to use these various tools to understand. And then these tools help us then develop the next tools and on down the line as we move through the analysis process. And then we are finally ready to move into design. Up to now, it's all been about the business and the business processes. But now we're going to move into we're going to bring technology into play. The analysis phase is about what the system needs to do. And in the design phase, we begin to say, how will I use the technology to make this, to create this solution? And so you begin to take those requirements and you turn them into actual specifications. And we began to draw things like, or design things like the user interface. What is a patient form going to look like that your patients are going to fill out when they come into your doctor's office? Or what is an order form going to look like? So we're going to start looking, and we're going to start being very very careful about here we're going to start talking about the architecture, the platform. Is this web-based, or is this a mainframe, or is this a network, whatever. We're gonna start looking at how we make things happen. And then finally, we move into the implementation, and the maintenance will be our last phase, which is, a finished product. Here it is, it's yours. Project team's finished. It now belongs to the organization. That clearly is the longest phase, the maintenance phase. It may stay in operation for years, and before it is actually developed again or done away with or whatever. So the most amount of money is going to be spent in maintenance, obviously, and the most amount of time. But apart from the maintenance, as far as the actual project team is concerned, implementation is very, very time consuming, and it's the most time consuming when we look at planning, analysis, design, and implementation. Implementation is the most time consuming of the bunch. This is where we actually develop the code, or if we're not writing the code, we actually acquire the software and install it or modify it, do whatever it is we need to do. So we get the actual code, the actual software, whether we write it or we purchase it or whatever we do. But we also go through testing and we go through installation. And so it's very, very, very important that we understand when we start putting this into operation that we have to be so mindful of organizational issues. And we have to be mindful of this all the way at the beginning. At the very beginning of the process, we've got to know and to keep in mind that whatever we build, we've got to implement it. So we need to know where our points of resistance are, where we think people are going to object or not be not be on the same page that we're on. We need to know how we think we're going to handle those situations and those circumstances. And then finally, of course, we go into, and I need to tell you that more of your failures are typically people problems, not technical problems. This resistance to change, this organizational change, this is where you really, really, really run into a lot of your failures. So I can't say enough about this issue. And then finally, the software ultimately goes into the maintenance. phase, and of course we have to build an infrastructure to leave it. Like you have to do your training, whatever is necessary, but then ultimately things like help desks and other support mechanisms get put into place, and you're going to have that first level of support, and then it talks also about your next levels, and then of course this is you're going to have routine updates, patches. You'll have problems that'll have to be fixed, bugs that'll have to be worked out, and then ultimately, we'll start all over again as we move out of the maintenance phase, and for some reason or another, we need to put this back into the development process as we began to start analyzing and going through again to rework this system or whatever. And I will be giving you a little more detail on Blackboard. I'll be writing a document with very specific instructions about your homework, and I'll be posting that on Blackboard. And please call me if you have any problems.